see every day in street roots. Unhoused people, their bodies are inscribed with the trauma of living on the streets, and they are, in a sense, always contending with not being in the right space. What we hear is that people are just getting arrested again and again and again because they're out in public spaces. Sometimes they're doing the things that if they were in a house, it wouldn't be a problem. So they end up just getting entangled with the legal system, and they're just beaten down by all of it. It's almost like, as a society, we're pushing people further and further into poverty and homelessness. Folks that are in law enforcement, their mission is about enforcing the law. Their mission is about dealing with crimes. We need to make sure that people who are homeless are encountering people whose mission is different than that. Their mission is public health. Their mission is making sure that everyone is thriving as much as humanly possible. Our newspaper interviewed Chief Outlaw. Chief Outlaw talked about how the police shouldn't be involved in a lot of these encounters that aren't part of what she described as a criminal nexus. So we knew, okay, at the highest levels in Portland police, we're hearing that the system isn't right.
When we send law enforcement officers to calls that don't necessarily require a law enforcement officer, we find that the types of calls that we're going to are either more complex because we recognize that there's no crime that's been committed, but there's a need for either a social service provider or there are resources that are outside of our realm of influence that are required. And our officers don't necessarily clear the call without a resolution. They actually take the time that's needed to either resolve the call or get those folks the services that they need. And because of that, that can take a longer than average time. And so we have officers that are responding to calls. They're far more complex in nature, taking longer on the calls, and as such, our response times to other calls around the city increase. And I think it's important that those who need services directly get the services that they need without having to jump through hoops or be passed along through various bureaucracies.
As the mentally ill, a lot of them are very scared of the police.
If there's some kind of crime being committed, maybe the better response would be the response team to come out and help people, get through the situation and find out what's really going on. And if the police need to be involved, they can be called.
We do have a mental health crisis that's going berserk in this city.
Our homeless population tend to have a lack of trust for police response now. The goal is sending people who are equipped to deal with a variety of situations, including mental illness, so that we can get a response that is more tailored to what their needs are. In Eugene, I was able to ride along with Cahoots. They had a paramedic and a social worker who responded together, and the paramedic would help with wound care and things like that. The social worker did a fantastic job really being able to calm people down, determine what their needs were in that moment, determine if it was appropriate to transport them, and if it was, to try to figure out the best way of accomplishing that. Both of them built a fantastic rapport with the clients and were able to build trust very quickly. And I know that many of the clients recognize Cahoots, it's part of their community.
Ultimately, when we're talking about these quality of life crimes that folks are getting cited for, whether it's panhandling, trespassing because somebody's trying to find a place to sleep for the night, illegal camping, open container, those things that might in other communities result in a police contact, we're able to provide a more compassionate and more appropriate response. And that means that they're less likely to end up getting arrested and tossed in jail for the night. As that criminal record builds for somebody, you can have a really hard time finding housing and an even harder time finding a job.
Today we have 24-hour van coverage in both Eugene and Springfield. We always have a minimum of 2 vans out at a time. Between our 911 and non-emergency lines, we are responding to over 24,000 calls annually. Our community really embraces Cahoots because we're able to take care of situations that aren't appropriate for police or EMS. a cahoots type program could truly benefit Portland, and it could be very successful because there are so many established programs and partner agencies to further serve the community.
I think the reason that there's strong support across our first responder community for this is that there's an understanding that right now we're not able to send the right resource to the right kind of situation. These calls that relate to somebody who is just struggling often don't require a police officer or a fire engine to come. But if we don't have anything else, that's who has to come. As important as Portland Street Response is in terms of ensuring that we're sending the right first responder to the appropriate situation, it won't address the housing crisis unless we're also expanding the available resources for the folks who are being engaged. Our ability to really capitalize on the benefits of that engagement depends on there being resources available, and that means housing.
We in public safety know the system is broken. Criminalizing mental health and homelessness is not the solution. We have been building out a community health assessment team that looks at high utilizers and tries to pair them with the appropriate resources. Portland Fire supports street response because this fits into our overall vision. It is a response model that puts compassion front and center back into the service.
A fully realized Portland Street Response program would be a great benefit to the entire community of Portland. It also will alleviate a significant portion of the call volume from traditional public safety resources and provide a more responsive resource for the community members who are reaching out to it.
In order to be successful, Portland Street Response needs to be big and it needs to be nimble. If the approach is onerous and rigid, then that approach is not going to work for a number of people who are on the streets. What we want from Portland Street Response is to not make life harder. And I will say emphatically that that is actually what our system does right now.
With your support, Portland can join a small but growing list of cities around the world who are developing a new and effective response model for trauma-informed care and mental health crises. Together, let's develop the appropriate response for our community members in need.
Good video.
Good afternoon, Council, Commissioner Armstead, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioner Fritz, Commissioner Daly. My name is Tom Reinhardt. I'm proud to be Chief Administrative Officer for the city, and I'm excited to be here with this group today. This very impressive panel that I don't usually get to sit with at this big table. My role here today is to give you an overview of the Coordinated Emergency Response Budget Note to set the stage for the report that we are presenting today that is part of that budget note. Before I begin, I would like everyone at this table to introduce themselves. Let's start at the end with Greg.
Greg Talmy, I'm an Associate Professor of Community Psychology at Portland State University, also the Director of Research for the Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative.
I'm Kaya Sand. I'm the Executive Director of Street Roots.
Good afternoon. I'm Danielle Outlaw, Portland Police Chief.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Causey, Director of Bureau of Emergency Communications.
Good afternoon. Sarah Boone, Portland Fire Chief.
Good afternoon, Tremaine Clayton, Chat Coordinator for Portland Street Response.
And before I continue, I want to thank everybody behind us who played a key role in this effort. We're glad you're here today. The budget note had 3 goals. Reduce emergency response times by effectively triaging calls to more appropriate service providers. Identify resources in our system for rapid street response. And finally, make recommendations for efficiencies across the public safety system related to day-to-day business operations, technology, administration, communications, and outreach. Chief Boone will outline the pilot in a minute. Before that, I want you to know the following about the entire budget note. My team and I followed this process very closely and believe we have a viable pilot that will teach us a lot about how to proceed as a city. For meetings with both Portland Fire and Rescue as well as community stakeholders, I believe we should withhold judgment on what types of teams will be most effective and what type of public-private partnership we should eventually pursue. In short, we have a lot to learn before we propose a final approach, and it should be driven by figuring out how to provide the best service to as many people as possible. It is important to put street response in the context of the entirety of the work we have undertaken together in public safety. While today we will understandably be focused on the great work being done to build this pilot model, our ability to expand on any learning and build upon it relies on our collective ability to successfully reimagine how we allocate resources as a public safety entity in the city of Portland. Under the direction of the Mayor and Commissioner Hardesty, and with the leadership of all public safety directors, the great group sitting at this table included, we have embarked upon our effort to find approximately $7 million in savings over the next 3 years by approaching our 4 bureaus as a public safety system instead of a set of independent entities. We look forward to showing you the fruits of that effort in several months and in regular check-ins with all of you. With that, I want to hand the microphone over to Chief Boone to walk through the pilot, the purpose we're here today to talk about. Chief Boone.
Thank you, Tom. Fire worked in collaboration with the stakeholder group and put together an internal team to determine the right response model for the appropriate care. Before I go over the entire program and outline, I would like to hand it off to Tremaine Clayton, our EMS specialist and our community health coordinator that oversees and was part of the Portland Street Response. He's going to tell you a little bit about himself, his background, and how fire has evolved to create a community health assessment team and the nexus that plays with Portland Street Response.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Good afternoon. So, approximately 2 years ago, I started working with our community healthcare assessment team in an effort to reduce our call volume to high utilizers, or those that were not having their needs met with our current system. We talked about the Cahoots program in the video, and Cahoots is just a service that's provided for, one of many services provided by Whitebird Clinic down in Eugene. About 5 years ago, I began as a Whitebird volunteer as a medic, where I had the direct privilege to work within that model of a 2-person medic crisis worker team to provide care that addresses both the physical and mental health needs of a person in distress. In that time, I was able to see trauma-informed care in action through holding space and following harm reduction standards or practices, where I was able to witness holistic healing of those people that were in crisis. Portland Street Response is an opportunity to deliver that compassionate hope to those experiencing those crises where there's no immediate threat to life, there is no crime being committed with no imminent fire hazard. Cahoots is a proven model that we can use as a guide for Portland Street Response so that we can add to the continuum of care to meet the needs of our vulnerable populations here in the city of Portland. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tremaine. I'm going to invite our principal management analyst to come up so we can talk a little bit about the data and why we chose Station 11's fire management area.
Good afternoon. I'm Robin Burrick with Portland Fire and Rescue. As we've looked at our call volume, particularly within fire, we can see that in the last 5 years, we've had an increase of 11% citywide. For the Lentz neighborhood, that's actually increased by 20%. So the Lentz neighborhood is outpacing the number of call responses that we're responding to. When we looked at where to start this pilot, the Lentz neighborhood makes up about 5 square miles, or yeah, 5 square miles. And it seemed reasonable for one team to start there. It seemed like a good spot. We also looked at some of the police's data as well. It seems like they're pretty busy out there as well, so it was a good fit for a pilot.
One of the things I'd like to reiterate, how Portland Fire is able to come to the table and partner
and be with every other stakeholder is because we built out a community health program before Portland Street response and what we were looking at the pilot, and as far as what we gathered going down to Eugene and Cahoots. We have a referral model in place right now where we have 2 community health members, Jermaine Clayton and Lisa Reslog. They work with high utilizers where our firefighters, basically we capture data within the incident reporting system and we make referrals to Tremaine and Lisa who follow up with people where we're not meeting their needs. And we work with Multnomah County Health. We connect them to social services, healthcare services,